Hi all, welcome to this video. Having understood the basic functions available with PHP, we will move into the database connection and see how PHP can communicate to the database and fetch data from the database server. There are three main API options when considering connecting to a database server: PHP's MySQL extension, MySQLi extension, and PHP data objects. The MySQLi extension, which is MySQL Improved, is a relational database driver used in PHP to provide an interface to the MySQL databases. The MySQL extension, which was used earlier, is no longer available. PHP does not understand SQL language. It only establishes the connection with the server and sends the SQL queries over the connection. The MySQL server interprets the SQL queries, follows the instructions, and sends the result or the status. In case of an error, it reports the error or follows the instructions. The MySQLi extension is used for the MySQL database. The PDO, the PHP data objects, will work on 12 different databases, whereas the MySQL will work only with the MySQL database. Communicating with MySQL has two phases. One is connecting to the MySQL server. Second is sending the query. The PHP language provides functions that make communication with the MySQL database server. You can use these PHP functions to send queries to the database. You only need to send the SQL queries, and you only need to know how to use the PHP functions. There are various benefits with the improved MySQL version, which gives us an object-oriented interface, support for prepared statements for sending multiple queries at the same time. It also gives us a debugging support and support for transactions. To connect to a MySQL server, we need to know the name of the computer on which the database is located and a user ID and password of the MySQL account. In certain cases, it is also required to know the name of the database. If you do not know the name of the database when you are initiating the connection, you can also add it at a later point in the script. To open a connection, we will use the MySQLi connect function. MySQLi connect function host represents the computer in which the database is located, the account, and the password, and the DB name. DB name is optional. The connection is created and it is mapped to the variable CXN. The variable CXN contains information which identifies the connection. If you want to open more than one connection, you can use multiple variables. The connection remains open until you close it or the script ends. To close a connection, you can use the MySQLi close method. So the connection name is nothing but the variable which we had used to create the connection. After you create the connection, the next step is to send the queries or the SQL statements to the server. To interact with the database, you have to put your SQL statements into a variable and send it using the MySQLi query function. Here I have a query which is select star from customer. It is assigned to a variable query. I am using the MySQLi query function. The connection name, that is the variable in which the connection information is present, and the query variable, both are passed as parameters to the query function. The query is executed on the selected database for the specified connection. The variable result will hold the information or the status of the query execution. Result will not contain the data. Results contain information about whether the query or statement executed successfully or not. If it's successful, result will have a value true. If it's not successful, it will be set to false. Some queries that do not return data are insert and updates. For queries or statements that return data, the result value will contain an identifier which specifies where the return data is located. Some queries that return data are select, show, etc. When we send queries to the SQL server, we have to be very careful in the usage of quotes. You have to use double quotes at the beginning and end of the string. For variable names or literal values, you have to use single quotes. So the query is enclosed within double quotes. Here you have a variable value, so this particular value is enclosed within single quotes and the entire query is enclosed within double quotes. Similarly goes for the variable names and literal values. The SQL statement does not include a semicolon, so don't put a semicolon inside the quotes. You can also send multiple queries using the multi-query function. To send multiple queries, you have to separate the queries with a semicolon. So here you can see select star from customer is the first query, select star from old customer is the second query, and both of them are separated with the semicolon. And the same function multi-query with the connection name and the query value are passed to the server. To select a database, you can use the selectDB function. You can use this function to select a different database at any point in your script. The database selected will stay valid until you select a different database. When a MySQL query function fails, SQL returns an error message which gives us information about the failure. But this information will not be displayed until you use the MySQLi error function to capture the information. For example, we have MySQLi query and we use the die MySQLi error function to capture the error. Let us discuss some of the useful MySQLi functions which are available. In case of select query, we would like to know the number of rows returned by a query in many situations. In that case, you can use the MySQLi numRows function. This will return the number of rows which has been returned by that particular query. Here in this example, we are going to check if the username and password entered by the user is valid. So here the query says select star from valid user where account is equal to the information entered by the user in the form of user ID and password. When you get a row with a valid username and ID, it indicates that the username is present in the database and is a valid user. If the value of n, that is the number of rows returned, is less than 1, it indicates that there is no user present with such a password and it is an invalid entry. Another useful function is to calculate the number of affected rows. Some queries change the database, but some don't. For instance, an update query can change the data in a table, but it does not return anything. In that case, we are not sure how many statements or how many rows will the update statement affect. To understand this, we can use the MySQLi affected rows to find out how many rows were updated using this update function. The query update student set status equal to pass where score greater than 50. The query is passed to the MySQL server and the MySQLi affected rows function with the connection as the parameter will return the total number of rows where the status was updated. One interesting thing about the MySQL statements is the prepared statements support. A prepared statement is a feature used to execute the same statement repeatedly with a high efficiency. Prepared statements basically work in two steps: prepare and execute. An SQL template is created and sent to the database. Certain values like parameters are not specified when we send the template. For example, insert into my guest, that is name of the table is given but the values are not specified where a question mark is specified. The database will parse, compile, and perform query optimization on the SQL template and store the result without executing it. In the second step, execute, the application binds the value to the parameters and then the database executes the statement. The application may execute the statement as many times as it wants with different values, but the prepare will happen only once. This improves a lot of efficiency on the database. Looking at the advantages, there are three main advantages for using prepared statements. Prepared statements reduces parsing time as the preparation is done only once. When we are bounding parameters, we are minimizing the bandwidth to the server as each query is only the parameter values are sent and not the whole query. Prepared statements are also useful against SQL injections because the parameter values which are transmitted later use a protocol which need not be correctly escaped. If the original template is not derived from an external input, SQL injection cannot occur. Let us see an example on how to use the prepared statement. Here we have prepare of function and create a template, insert into my guest, first name, last name, email, and the values are not passed. Then I pass the parameter values using the bind param function. So I have assigned the values to the variable and I'm passing the variable names in the bind param, which will map these values to the appropriate question mark. So we should always pass the parameters in order. We insert a question mark where we want to substitute an integer, string, or double. This function will bind the parameters to the SQL query and tells the database about the information of the parameters. The SS argument present lists the type of data that the parameters belong to. The S character tells MySQL that the parameter is a string. The argument can be any of the four types. S stands for string, D for double, I for integer, and B for blob. By telling MySQL what type of data to expect, we also minimize the risk of SQL injections. Having understood the MySQLi API in connecting PHP to the MySQL database, we will look at what a PHP data object is. PHP data object is a general database abstraction layer with support for MySQL along with other databases. It also supports prepared statements and gives us significant flexibility in how data is fetched from the database. The only difference is using PDO, you can access around 12 different databases, but with the MySQLi, you can access only the MySQL database. All the functionalities available with the MySQLi is also available with the PDO. We will see a small example on how to create a PDO connection. So the new PDO is created. MySQL:host represents the host name. The DB name represents the database name, the username, and the password. You can use the query function to pass the query. Here we have inserted a symbol invalid query. You can enter the proper SQL statements or the query statements which belongs to different databases. To summarize, PHP offers built-in support for many databases, but PHP seems to have high efficiency and better performance with MySQL, and that is the reason why MySQL and PHP have been always used together. With MySQLi, you can use PHP to connect only to the MySQL server. With the PDO, you can use PHP to connect to 12 different types of databases. Thank you.